Like I said, this lesson's dated March the 1st, but we're going to do it today. All right, we're going to be talking about Nebuchadnezzar. The first time I ever heard that name, I don't recall hearing it in church and Sunday school. I may have. But the first time I really remember was 8th grade world history class in the Sharon City School District. And he is an actual historical figure. If I studied him in the Sharon City School District 8th grade world history, he's a real dude. So when I got to read about him in the Bible, I go, oh yeah, I heard about that guy before. So Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. And we're going to be looking today at the book of Daniel, part of the book of Daniel, looking specifically at a dream, a vision that Nebuchadnezzar had. And it puzzled him. And Daniel is the one who interprets it for him. This lesson provides a good introduction into the book of Daniel, a prophetic book written during Judah's exile. In it, God used visions, dreams, and symbolic imagery to convey a critical message about the future. The message was twofold. The exile would end and hope would return. God is sovereign over the kingdoms of the world, then, now, and through the end of time. And that gives us a great deal of hope now. No matter what we're going through, God is sovereign, God is in control. And I read the final chapter and we win. You read the 22nd chapter of the book of Revelation, we win. All right, we're going to be primarily in the second chapter, but as they normally do, they don't do every verse, so we'll be skipping through the verses. But for your reference, if you want to go to Daniel chapter 2, you can do that. We're going to start in verse 1, then skip down to verse 19, so there's a whole lot of verses in there. I'll try to fill in some of the stuff that's going on between these verses. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled. He could not sleep. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the king, the emperor of the Babylonian Empire. They were the preeminent empire of the day. They ruled pretty much all over the globe. He ruled with an iron fist, and we see him a lot in the book of Daniel. So Nebuchadnezzar is a very powerful man, a non-Jewish man. Definitely not a Christian, but he was not Jewish. He was not a God-fearing man, but he was a military man who had great and tremendous power. And there was a time when he had a dream of a statue, and we're going to get into a little bit of that. And it troubled him because he could not understand what he was seeing. And it was ultimately Daniel, a prophet of God, who would provide the interpretation that Nebuchadnezzar was looking for. So in his second year, he had these dreams. His mind was troubled. He could not sleep. You've never done that. You've had a dream that troubled you. We all do. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. Again, we go from verse 1 to verse 19. There's a whole bunch of verses in there. In the interim, Nebuchadnezzar puts out a search for someone who is able to interpret his dream. He really wants to know what it's about, and pretty much there's nobody around. He finally comes to understand that there is a man of God there. His name is Daniel, and he might be able to help. So Daniel is summoned into Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar tells Daniel what the dream is. And then we pick up in verse 19, where Daniel is then given by God the interpretation of what Nebuchadnezzar has seen. So during the night, the mystery was revealed. in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. And again, this came from God to Daniel, who then takes it to the king. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" So this is really bothering him. He really wants to understand what it is that he is seeing. Daniel replies, we're now in verse 27, Vince, if you're following along.
Yes.
Okay. Daniel replies, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about." So this is a very difficult thing, and what Daniel is basically saying is there is no human being who is able to interpret the thing that you have seen. Daniel then goes on to explain that this interpretation is from God. That nobody can explain to you what you want to hear. This is what God says. And ultimately that leads us to understand it was God that planted the vision, the dream in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar, because God wanted to convey a message to this great and powerful king. But there is a God in heaven who does reveal mysteries. This is Daniel speaking, talking about an opportunity to give a witness for the Lord. You're in front of this extremely powerful man, probably the most powerful man on the face of the earth, and you are being able to tell him the things of God. What a golden opportunity. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. So what is this? It is a prophecy. God has given a prophecy to a king who is not a follower of God concerning world events and kingdoms to come, which then tells us that God is in control of the kingdoms of the world. It is He that has called the United States into existence, and we're going to see specifically by the interpretation of God and looking back through the lens of history who these four kingdoms were. And in the vision, it was a statue, and there were four different specific parts that were given to him. Each part represents a kingdom that came into existence in ancient history. So this is all in ancient history. This does not come into the modern times. If it were to do that, it would be very different than the way it actually was. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty, was lying there, your mind turned to things to come. The revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. So he had a glimpse into the future. So it is very possible, and we have seen this before, for God to use an ungodly man to accomplish his will. And this isn't the first time that he's used Nebuchadnezzar. Remember the exile of 70 years from the Holy Land of the Jewish people because of their idolatry. God used a king who was not a follower of God to bring judgment upon God's people. So God has used Nebuchadnezzar before, and he's using him now to look into the future. We have talked on several different occasions that prophecy primarily in Scripture takes two forms. One is looking into the future and foretelling things that will happen. The second is speaking to contemporary things about a situation, calling people back to God. This is the first one, looking into the future. And God is going to reveal that 4 kingdoms will come into the ancient world. The first of those is the Babylonians, the one over whom Nebuchadnezzar rules and reigns. The mystery showed you of things that are going to happen. These are future events. And if you have studied the book of Daniel, it is one of the most prophetic books in the Old Testament concerning the end times. In fact, a lot of times Daniel and Revelation are seen as twin books. So a lot of times to fully understand Revelation, you need to have a good grasp of what Daniel is saying, because they kind of coexist together. Or you could say Daniel is the revelation of the Old Testament. Not quite as explicit as Revelation is, but it is an event looking into the future. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what through your mind. So again, Daniel is giving all of the praise to God. I have this not because of who I am, but because of the God in heaven. God has given this to me. Daniel was an extremely humble man. One of the most powerful men in all existence at that time. Yet he was very humble. And here he is standing again in front of the most powerful man on the face of the earth, telling him of the things of God. In your hands he has placed all manner and the beasts of the fields and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. So in the vision there is a head, and again it is a statue. The head is made of gold. What is gold? It is the most precious of all metals. And also the head indicates it is the greatest. The greatest kingdom of the ancient world was the Babylonian kingdom. They had no equals at their time or in the years to come. And we're going to look at 3 other ancient kingdoms that came after them, but none of them could compare to the power of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. And Daniel says here, God has placed all mankind, the beasts of the fields, the birds in the sky, wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Again, the most powerful man in existence. So the first part is the head. It is made of pure gold. That represents Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. But nothing on this earth is eternal. Things change. Empires come and go. And this empire would give way to another empire. And that's as we move down the body. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to you. Okay, who is this second kingdom that is coming into existence? The Persians. The Persians, and they carried a lot of the same territory, but they were inferior to the Babylonians. They didn't have the military might, they didn't cover the land, and so they were lesser than Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. That would be the Greek Empire. And the Greeks, again, were very powerful, and a lot of the most intellectual things in the ancient world came out of the Greeks. Philosophy. Greeks were great thinkers, and that's where philosophy comes from. And if you really want to blow your mind, take a course in philosophy. They'll make you doubt that you even exist. It's just strange stuff. Okay, so then we come to the Greeks. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything, and as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. That would be the Roman Empire. So we go from the Babylonian Empire to the Persians, to the Greeks, to the Romans. I want to skip ahead and read what they say in here concerning this and fill in a lot of the blanks. Daniel did not panic despite the king's death penalty decree. When the commander of the guards came to put him to death, he spoke with wisdom and tact, a reflection of faith and confidence in the Lord. First, Daniel asked for an explanation for the harsh decree. Then he asked for an audience with the murderous king. In the king's presence, Daniel bravely declared that he would provide the interpretation, only asked that he be given some time. So when he was first met with the king, he was threatened to be killed. He says, I'll tell you what you want to hear, but you need to give me some time to figure this out. And Nebuchadnezzar granted that. Daniel at that time did not know the interpretation, but he trusted God and called together his three friends. Note that these friends are better known by the names Nebuchadnezzar had given them: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Abednego. You've heard of the three Hebrew children? These are the three friends that Daniel called to himself to pray over him, for God to help him to understand. Daniel and his friends began to pray fervently to God in his mercy that he would provide the secret that only God knew. Daniel needed the interpretation to save their lives. They spent the night in heartfelt prayer, and God revealed the secret of the dream and its interpretation in the form of a night vision. This speaks of a supernatural revelation. God had answered their prayers. Note that they responded with a humble expression of praise in poetic form. In ancient times, poetry often represented intense thoughts and feelings. Okay, having declared that God was guiding his words, Daniel explained the king's dream. Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed of an enormous, dazzling statue. Its head was solid gold, chest and arms were silver, brass made up the belly and thighs, and the legs were made of iron. However, the iron of the feet was mingled with clay, making the feet very unstable. Suddenly a rock, which notably was not cut by human hands, smashed the feet of the statue. The figure broke to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. Then the rock became a mountain and filled the entire earth. Nebuchadnezzar's dream was rich in symbolism, describing the empires that would dominate the part of the world until Christ's final return. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire represented the statue's golden head. Gold was an appropriate representation of this kingdom. Babylon was the greatest city of its time. Its walls were roughly 344 feet high and 86 feet wide, and enclosed nearly 200 square miles of territory. That's the city of Babylon. Talk about New York or Los Angeles being a metropolitan area.
You know, I heard those walls, they went, I think it was like 60 or 90 feet underground.
Yeah. It was well built, well fortified. In ancient times, there weren't many armies that were going to penetrate that. With modern warfare, it meant nothing. You just bomb right over it. But in ancient times, it worked very well. Nebuchadnezzar exercised control over this kingdom, yet while Daniel's description of the king's great power may have appealed to Nebuchadnezzar's pride, no, he didn't have any pride. Yeah, he was a very prideful man. Daniel clearly stated that the king ruled at God's pleasure. And there's an important note there, that the rulers of the world rule at God's pleasure. You say, well, how can God allow communists to rule? God could obliterate them if he wanted, but he allows them, and who's to know the mind of God? I don't know. But if God could use a man like Nebuchadnezzar for his purposes, who's to say that he couldn't use a communist dictator for his purposes? God is God. He is sovereign. He will do what he will do. Despite Nebuchadnezzar's greatness, Daniel informed him that his kingdom would not last forever. Oh, I'm sure the king loved hearing that. Him saying that this is only going to be a temporary deal. You're not going to be around forever. A prophecy that came to pass about 20 years after Nebuchadnezzar's death. A total of 3 kingdoms would follow, each inferior to the previous. The Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Persian Empire, symbolized by the arms and chest of silver and inferior metal. If you have a choice of investing in gold or investing in silver, you go for gold, because it's more valuable than silver is. Silver is valuable, but on the commodities market, gold goes for a whole lot higher price than does silver. So the second part, moving down the body from the head, is the Persian Empire. This empire was inferior because its monarch did not hold absolute power. We see in this, as the decree of the king Darius could not cancel the law sending Daniel to the lions. So Daniel lived during the fall of the Babylonian Empire into the time when the Persians took over, and actually it was King Darius who sent the captives back. Nebuchadnezzar would have never done that. And again, the captivity was a period of 70 years. And Jonathan Kahn has some interesting ideas as to why it was 70 years. But after the period of 70 years, they went back. That was under the Persians, King Darius. So that was a weaker empire than were the Babylonians. Continuing down the statue, the belly and thighs of brass represented the Greek Empire, established by Alexander the Great in 330 BC. This vast empire extended from modern-day India to Yugoslavia. Yet its diminished power resulted in rebellion. In fact, when Alexander died, the empire broke into 4 sections. So each succeeding empire is weaker than the one before it. So we go from the Greeks down to the Romans. The Greek Empire was followed by the Roman Empire in the 1st century, with legs of iron foreshadowing the brutality of the empire. Yet it too was inferior to Babylon, and it eventually fell. Out of its collapse grew a section of weaker states signified by the mixture of clay and iron in the feet. These nations held varying degrees of power and were often short-lived. Who was it that ultimately overthrew the Roman Empire? The Vikings, the Nordic states, from up in northern part of Europe. These people came down and overthrew the Romans. If you were to include modern kingdoms, you could probably say that the most powerful kingdom in the history of mankind would not be Babylon, it would be the United States of America. But this statute does not go that far. It only basically goes into and including the life of Christ. There were other kingdoms that came after that, some very powerful. Prior to the rise of the United States as a world power, the preeminent empire on the face of the earth was the British Empire. It was said at one time the sun never sets on the British Empire. It was such a vast worldwide, and there were others going back farther. Yes? What's that?
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay.
We were talking about the walls of Babylon.
Right.
And how tall they were and wide they were, and it was a well-fortified city. You know how the Persians came by and they conquered Babylon. It was really quite ingenious how they did it because it was such a fortified city. The river Euphrates ran through Babylon, and the Persians, they dammed up the river and they went under the moat, and that's how they took the city. It was rather ingenious how they did that.
We saw somewhat of a similar return to that under Saddam Hussein. At least for him, there was great wealth in Babylon, which became modern-day Iraq. We all know what his demise was. He met the American military, and it didn't last too long. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. Notice he says, in the time of those kings, that would be Babylon, Persia, Greek, and Rome. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. That would refer, of course, to the kingdom of God, which would be represented through the life of Jesus Christ. The kingdom of God has absolutely no equal. It will never be destroyed. It will never end. To the end of time, it will continue to go on. Nor will it be left to another people. In other words, God is not going to give the kingdom of God to anyone else. He is ruler of it for all time. The Lord of lords, King of kings, he has no equal. There is no one who can stand in his presence without bowing down. He is the great one, the almighty one. He is the Redeemer of the earth. And I heard some profound words from Governor Mike Huckabee, who before he was governor of Arkansas, before he ran for president, before he was a Fox News on-air personality, he was a pastor of a Baptist church in Arkansas. So this is coming from a pastor's heart. He's saying that the problems in America today are not a skin problem, but a sin problem. It's a hardened heart. And there's one thing that we need to understand. You cannot legislate morality. You cannot legislate someone's heart to change. You can change rules, you can change laws, you can change a lot of things. But according to Joe Biden, 15 to 20% of the people in this country are rotten people. I guess that's his deplorable moment. There goes the election. Leave it to Joe. You cannot legislate someone's changed heart. The only place that happens is through Christ.